Hello everyone, Stealthy Sharoan here, and today we're taking a look at the Humble Choice bundle for October 2021. My process for this is I play each game for roughly about an hour, then I tell you my thoughts on them, and ultimately if they're even worth your time. I'll just say this up front though, this bundle wasn't that great. There are a few titles that are worth playing, but many aren't. Please check the timestamps if you want to look at a particular game, and be sure to listen to my final thoughts in the end. Let's get to it and see which ones are good and which ones are meh. Syberia 3 is a point-and-click adventure game set in a fantastical version of our own world. As the name implies, it is the third game of an established franchise. There seem to be some things that may have been references to previous games, but I didn't feel like I was that lost playing this one, as I had no prior experience with the series. Although, the first two games were given away for free very recently, so it's obviously not a coincidence that this game is in the bundle, especially with the new entry to the series coming out in December. Anyway, as far as Syberia 3 goes, I didn't get that far in my hour with the game. What I did play, I thought was just alright. The controls felt a bit weird at times. You could use WASD to move, but point and click makes it more accessible. Go figure. However, there were some weird camera angles and transition placements that made for a bit of frustration. I thought the puzzles weren't always that intuitive either. There were some moments where I came across things by accident, or didn't understand how I was supposed to interact with an item despite knowing what it was for. The story seemed fine, and there definitely is some sort of mystery that will keep a player interested, such as what is this hospital up to and who are the people trying to get the main character, Kate Walker. Although, again, I'm not sure how much of that is actually filled in from playing the first two games. Most of the execution of the story was fine as well, but I did feel that the voice acting for Kate seemed off at times. I don't think the voice actress had as much emphasis in her voice as she should have for certain lines that demanded it. Overall, I don't think I'd come back to this one though, or if I did, it wouldn't be anytime soon. It just didn't do enough to captivate me, and since it's the third one in the series, I'd feel compelled to start from the beginning if I was going to play it at all. The next game is Black Future 88, a roguelite bullet hell platformer. Yes, it's another one. I'm not sure why I'm surprised, because by now it should be expected to come with the territory. If you're purchasing a Humble Choice bundle, then you're gonna get a roguelite platformer. Anyway, enough of my ranting. Is this game any good? I mean, it's okay. First off, I wasn't really a fan of the aesthetic too much. There's a lot of dark reds and blacks contrasted with bright lights. Just wasn't my thing. I thought the color palette was a bit bland despite the high contrast lighting. The gameplay was serviceable. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't anything stand out, especially next to the other roguelites I played recently. I did think it was rather difficult though, so if you like a high difficulty ceiling, then this might be something worth a try. There didn't seem to be any story at all to the game either, beside the intro cutscene, which was a bit of a bummer because I thought the cutscene set up something interesting. It seems the main purpose of the intro was to establish the game's main feature, which was the timer for levels. You have a set time to get through and kill the boss, which in some cases can be spent for upgrades. This game was just average in my book. I don't plan to come back to this one. I did think the soundtrack was pretty good though. Hiveswap Friendsim is a visual novel revolving around the joys of friendship. Or not. So, as you may already know, I don't play visual novels, so take what I say with a grain of salt here if that is your thing. Basically, I just didn't get this game at all. I felt the story was random and nonsensical at times. It starts with you crash landing on the planet of Alternia, which is inhabited by trolls with a rather unique caste system based on the color of their blood. Honestly, that was the most interesting thing to me in this game. Anyway, despite rather severe injuries, the one thing you want more than anything else is friendship. Of course. In each episode, you'll meet a variety of characters, with many of them just being so completely strange. The first guy I talked to was holding this hot dog and went on about it for about 5 minutes or so, saying just how great it was. Yeah, not really sure what to think here. I thought the writing and the humor used here just wasn't my cup of tea. The artwork wasn't bad though, but don't assume this is some happy-go-lucky story, as it does have darker themes within the dialogue. Anyway, occasionally the game presents the player with a few dialogue choices that will ultimately determine whether or not you made a new friend. And then it's on to the next episode to do the same thing. Yeah, so this one was a no-go for me. The visual novel genre aside, I just couldn't get into the writing. But I suppose try this if you want something kind of weird. Tools Up is a cooperative party game where you play as a handyman trying to renovate an apartment. It's something in the vein of Overcooked or Out of Space, another game featured in a previous Humble Choice. In this one, you need to follow a blueprint to prepare the rooms as indicated by the changes, to collect stars and get to higher levels of the tower. In the beginning, the player makes the necessary modifications through painting walls and carpeting floors. Eventually, you'll be required to prime the walls or floors first, and place down increasingly more complicated materials. Even environmental challenges are thrown into the mix, like needing to fish out your equipment from a nearby water source. To be honest, I found this game to be rather difficult and not in a fun way. Knocking into things and constantly picking up the wrong thing because the highlighted item was off made it kind of annoying. I felt the controls weren't responsive 100% of the time either. Then, tie this together with the timer that you have to beat, it just gets to be a little too much. At first, I thought maybe it was just me because I was playing this game single player when it was clearly meant to be played with other people. So, I jumped into a game with my wife, and basically, we had the exact same experience. Bottom line, I wouldn't recommend playing this one. It didn't really feel that fun, and combined with its jank and the timer, just made for a frustrating time. The Textorcist is a game that combines bullet hell and typing, where you play as an exorcist who used to work for the church but now seems to work as a freelancer. I remember coming across this game before and thinking how unique of an idea this was. I thought it'd be like playing Mavis Beacon, but fun. Sound out in the comments if anyone actually remembers Mavis Beacon. And the gameplay definitely is unique, and I commend the devs for attempting to do something different, but unfortunately, I felt the game was too insanely difficult for me to have any fun with it. Now, I feel like my typing speed isn't horrible. It's definitely not really fast, but I'm not a chicken pecker or anything like that. But typing speed isn't the real problem here. The issue falls more on how you control the movement of the character and the need to switch between typing and moving. You either need to use the arrow keys to move, or hold shift and use the WASD keys. I felt the arrow keys were too disruptive to my typing because I needed to move my hand constantly to try and dodge the bullets and then bring it back to type my exorcism. The shift plus WASD had its own problems as well. I felt that I constantly messed up my exorcism because it would register a letter and cause me to retype the word I was on. The game tries to alleviate this problem by making the player invulnerable as long as he's holding his Bible. However, if you do get hit, then he'll drop the book and you'll need to rush to pick it up again to complete the exorcism. I found that because of the aforementioned control issues, I spent a lot of time just rushing around trying to pick the Bible back up, and then ultimately dying because I wasn't invulnerable. I won't be playing this game again either. A recurring trend with this month's bundle, unfortunately. But as I said, the Textorcist was just too punishing for me to be any fun, despite its unique gameplay blend. The next one is Garage Bad Trip, a top-down, fast-paced action zombie apocalypse game. According to the Steam page, the devs wanted to create a game with the feeling of an old VHS B-movie, and I think they nailed that feeling even if it wasn't something that vibed well with me. The very first impressions of this game didn't start off right when I was greeted with this very annoying sound almost right out of the gate. Thankfully, the game doesn't seem to use that noise again for when your health is low. Anyway, after the main character gets their bearings, then you get into the combat gameplay, which I didn't really like. I actually thought it was pretty excruciating to play through in the beginning. The game requires the player to have quick reflexes and environmental awareness, yet I felt that it used a lot of sudden attacks which resulted in what felt like a cheap death. You basically need to die first in order to understand how to react appropriately to each encounter. And if you can't dodge perfectly, then you're dead. One section right before you get the pistol got me so fed up with the game that I shut it off and was going to end it at that. After some convincing from my wife though, I went back to it and got past those stupid rats. Once you get a gun, the game feels a lot better. I can't say that it completely changed my outlook of how I felt, but it definitely made it feel playable. I know some people say that the gameplay is a lot like Hotline Miami, which I know was an insanely popular game. I never played it though, and maybe that's a good thing if so, because I didn't really care for Garage. Ring of Pain is yet another roguelite game, but at least it's not a platformer. Actually, it's a card dungeon crawler, which I thought was a cool concept. I didn't really understand the story or setting that much, other than there is an owl-looking creature who is supposedly trying to help you. The gameplay loop was fun, requiring the player to delve through a dungeon with each room represented by a circle of cards. Or a ring, if you will. Each turn you select which card you want to engage with, to either get an item, buff, or fight a monster. The circle makes you think about the order of how you'll engage with each of these cards, or maybe just move on to the next room altogether if the risk is too great. As you dive deeper into the dungeon, you come across shops, ambushes, unexplored paths that have a special characteristic, and more. Your character has set stats too that will determine your playstyle as you make your way through the dungeon, such as having a higher speed to gain initiative, or having a high defense to parry attacks. I thought this ring mechanic was a cool idea, and felt the game was pretty fair even with random elements of a roguelite. Most of my deaths could have been avoided if I planned efficiently or made better choices. In a couple runs I almost completed my ring around the dungeon, but ultimately failed to complete one full rotation. I think I'll come back to this one at some point and see if I can't complete it at least once. Before getting into the next game, does anyone remember a game called Happy Wheels? I never played it myself, but I remember watching PewDiePie playing it back in the day. If you do know what Happy Wheels is, then you have a pretty good idea about what Guts and Glory is. For those who don't, Guts and Glory is a physics-focused game centered around completing a series of gruesome obstacle courses. Right off the bat, I knew this wasn't going to be something I'd probably enjoy. And I was more or less right. I felt the controls were very floaty, and I suppose that's the point because you need to master them to get through each subsequent harrowing course. That being said, most of the characters did feel different, so I'm sure there's a lot of replay value in mastering each of them, such as the hoverboard kid or the guy in a jetpack-propelled lawn chair. If you just want to get in the game and screw around, or if you feel a particular course is too hard, then you can actually skip the level, which I thought was nice. But basically, I just can't get into this game. The controls aside, I didn't really care for the premise of it or its obvious flavor of humor. So, it's another game that I won't be coming back to after this review. 112 Operator is a simulation management game where you play the role of an emergency operator. Over the course of play, you get incidents and 112 calls that pop up, and as an operator, you'll need to determine what the proper responses are to the calls and which units to send on site. There's a certain tension when trying to figure out who to send where because you'll find yourself spread thin after a while. I imagine as you progress further, each call needs to be thoughtful in its execution to be the most efficient. Furthermore, your responses to the emergency calls also determine outcomes and affect your overall performance. I thought dialogue choices were a bit of a drawback at times only because they didn't always match what I thought I'd say, or were things that I didn't really want to say. But this was a minor thing that didn't really affect my enjoyment that much. At the end of each session, the game gives a breakdown of how each case played out, which I thought was a nice touch because there were several cases where I wanted to know what happened. I didn't get that far in my hour, but as the player progresses, they'll have to manage more districts, which adds more complexity to the game. Also, you can play in a huge variety of cities, and there's a good chance that you can play in the city that you live in as well. The game was a pleasant surprise, especially with the state of the rest of this bundle. I enjoyed it quite a bit more than I thought I would, and will play it again in the future. Wick Hex is described on Steam as a fast-paced, action-oriented strategy game. I'd agree with the second half of that description, but I'd say it's pretty much as fast as it takes for the player to make their action. The gameplay plays as a real-time game, but it pauses after each action, giving the player time to think about how to maneuver John Wick to fight his way to the end of a level. In order to do so, you have to take appropriate cover and spend your resources, such as ammo or focus, to shoot or punch your way out of every situation. The way all these actions are tracked is on a timeline visible to the player. A good player watches the timeline to determine when to take certain actions to negate enemy attacks or interrupt with their own attack before the enemy can react. The mechanic was interesting, but I definitely underutilized it for most of my hour with the game. The storytelling seemed decent, but honestly, I didn't really know much about any of the characters or John Wick lore. I only ever watched the first movie, and I don't really remember much of it, other than they killed his dog. I thought this was a fun strategy game, but nothing amazing. I would probably come back to this one, especially if I finally get around to watching the rest of the movies. Amnesia Rebirth is the headlining horror game for the October bundle. Most people have played Amnesia: The Dark Descent, and probably have a good idea what they're getting into here. If not, then it's basically a horror game that focuses heavily on narrative and essentially a powerless main character. There are no weapons, and the player will have to rely on hiding from any ghoulies trying to eat them. While this is set in the Amnesia franchise, I wouldn't say that it's a sequel to The Dark Descent, but more so just using the Amnesia lore as a backdrop and obvious nods to the first game. I felt the story so far is compelling enough to want to find out more about what happened to Tassi, the main character. It starts with her plane crashing into the desert, and she wakes up with no memory of recent events and no one with her. As you trek through the desert to find answers, she remembers more about what happened, and recalls things that happened to her in the past, usually revolving around her husband Salim. The game's story really pulls on your heartstrings early on, and I thought it did a good job doing so. As far as the horror goes, well, I haven't exactly gotten into too many horror sections yet. I mean, the atmosphere is top-notch, and exploring the, albeit linear, levels can still have a spooky feel. However, if you're looking to play this game for its cat-and-mouse hiding, or maybe some weird psychological disturbing twists like in The Dark Descent, I'm not sure if that's here or not. But I'm only an hour into a game that seems to take about 8 hours to complete. I thought my time with it was great. It might not be as scary as The Dark Descent, or as philosophical as Soma, but it still has its own charm that will have me finishing this one before the Halloween season is up. The final game in the bundle is Katana Zero, which is a platformer with fast-paced action. This time I really mean fast-paced action. The other thing to note is that any hit to your character results in instant death. There's no health here. That may sound daunting. I know when I first heard about this game, I thought it sounded interesting, but that feature alone scared me off. I am so glad this was included in this bundle to force me to give it a try. because this game is amazing. Everything about it was superbly well done. The pixel art visuals were nice, and the music is absolutely top-notch. This will be a new soundtrack for me to listen to while I work on things. I actually really liked how the main character would start up his cassette player to play music the player listens to at the beginning of a level. It was a neat little touch that added some personality to him. And the story was really interesting, with many questions I wanted to find answers to. Like in the start, it tells you there are 10 days remaining, with that ticking down after each level. What does that mean? The main character seems to be working for a shadowy organization and has weird nightmares that you piece together as you play more. I was also surprised that there were dialogue options that seemed to change things in the story depending on what you chose. The gameplay, as I said, seems daunting at first, but it's really fun when you start getting a handle on how to play. You have to learn each area and figure out the right combination of actions to get through, which is challenging, yet rewarding. It differed from Garage Bad Trip, which could be argued to have similarly fast gameplay, but in Katana Zero I never felt like any one of my deaths was cheap. Here, I was required to learn the mechanics and understand how to use them to finish a section rather than having something randomly jump me. Without a doubt, I'm going to return to this game. It ticked every box for me for the kind of game that it is. Okay, so now we reached the end of the video. So let's wrap this up and see if this bundle is worth it or not. I based my rating solely on whether I thought the game was worth playing on about an hour or so of hands-on gameplay. Overall, this bundle is just not good. You really need to want at least 2 or 3 games from this bundle to make a purchase worth it. Many of these games were just average or weren't really fun for me. With the vast differences in the type of games, and probably many of them being relatively unknown, I can't imagine that there are very many people where most of these games will resonate with them. My top recommendation this month is hands down Katana Zero. I know it's one of the headliners, but it just blew everything else away. As I said, everything about this game was just amazing. It may not be for everyone, but I think everyone should at least give it a try. Following that, there weren't really any other strong recommendations other than Amnesia Rebirth. It may not be The Dark Descent, but I thought there was enough here that any fans of frictional games will probably like this as well. As horror fans in general, well, maybe not so much. Weaker recommendations would be 112 Operator, Ring of Pain, and Wick Hex. 112 Operator was a surprise hit for me, but I can see why being an emergency operator might not be to everyone's liking. For any who are into management games though, this one will probably be a fun time. Ring of Pain was a nice card game that had a unique mechanic with their ring exploration dungeon crawl. Probably won't eat up that much time for most people, but it's a good distraction. Finally, I thought Wick Hex is fun with its mix of action and almost turn-based combat. Reacting to changing dynamics is cool, but sometimes the stiffness of the animations can break the John Wick illusion. And finally, all the rest of them are in my not recommended section, being Syberia 3, Black Future 88, Hiveswap Friendsim, Tools Up, The Textorcist, Garage Bad Trip, and Guts of Glory. Phew, that is a lot, and it honestly surprised me. I think this has got to be a record for me with any of these monthly bundles. But anyway, not all of these games were necessarily bad. Syberia 3 and Black Future 88 were average games, but I didn't feel they did enough for me. Garage Bad Trip has a painful start, but it does seem to get better as you get further along. The Textorcist might be fun, but you'll need patience to deal with the controls and typing at the same time. Almost the same can be said about Guts and Glory as well if you can get over the controls and are okay with its oddness. Hiveswap is the same with its eccentricity. If that's to your liking, then maybe it will work for you. I think Tools Up is probably the only game that is definitely a don't bother with it, because there are better games like this out there. Anyway, these were my thoughts on this month's bundle. This was a rather poor month, but maybe you didn't think so. Let me know what your thoughts are, or if there are any different recommendations you'd make in the comments below. Thanks for watching! I hope this video helped you in some way, and if it did, then please consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, or whatever it is you feel like doing. Thanks again, and have a nice day.